What if the kid who cut the tape on Abbey Road and engineered Dark Side of the Moon sold 50 million records without anyone knowing his face? Two architects built a sonic cathedral. No permanent band, no touring, just studio perfection that outsold the stars. They created the anthem that introduced Michael Jordan, though he never knew their names. Then came the courtroom battles, the silent ending, and a partnership dissolved without goodbye. This is the rise and fall of the Alan Parsons Project. Abbey Road Studios, 1968. While the world was consumed with the faces and personalities of rock stars, a 19-year-old tape operator named Alan Parsons was learning a different lesson. The invisible architects behind the music, the engineers, the producers, the technical masters, wielded just as much power as the artists standing in front of the microphone. Parsons had entered Abbey Road in the most humble way possible, starting in the tape libraries where technical engineers wore white lab coats like scientists. This wasn't romantic rock and roll. This was clinical, formal, precise. But for a young man obsessed with sound, it was paradise. Before we continue, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. By 1969, Parsons had advanced to assistant engineer, and his timing couldn't have been better. The Beatles were recording their final albums. Picture this scene. The final day of mixing I Want You, She's So Heavy. And John Lennon, wearing that iconic white suit, walks into the control room. "Let's not fade out," Lennon said. "Let's just cut the tape. Do it there." And with a pair of scissors, snip. The song ended in brutal, unexpected silence. That moment of decisive, unconventional studio mastery left a permanent mark on Parsons. Music wasn't just about performance, it was about architecture. About choices made in the control room that could transform a good song into something unforgettable. Then came 1973 and the project that would cement Parsons' legend, Pink Floyd's The Dark Side of the Moon. As lead engineer, Parsons helped them push the boundaries of what recorded sound could be. Those ticking clocks on time. The cash register loops on money recorded in 7/4 time. These weren't just technical tricks. They were innovations that transformed the studio itself into an instrument. For the audiophiles who spent weekends obsessing over frequency response and speaker placement, Dark Side became the gold standard, and the kid behind the mixing console became a legend. But Parsons had a vision beyond engineering someone else's masterpiece. In 1974, he met Eric Woolfson in the Abbey Road canteen. Woolfson was a manager and songwriter who understood both the business side of music and the emerging concept of the producer as director. They shared a fascination with thematic storytelling, with the idea that an album could be a complete artistic statement. Together, they began to imagine something radical. What if the producer held ultimate creative control? What if musicians were chosen like colors from a painter's palette, selected specifically for each song rather than locked into a permanent lineup? What if the studio itself became the band? In 1975, Pink Floyd invited Parsons to engineer Wish You Were Here, but Parsons declined. He had his own dream to chase. He and Woolfson were going to create something that had never existed before. They were going to build the Alan Parsons Project. Tales of Mystery and Imagination. That was the name of their debut album, released in 1976. A concept album based on Edgar Allan Poe. Dark, literary, ambitious. Everything the record company said wouldn't sell. The album's preview wasn't held in a traditional venue. Instead, the entire record was played at the Griffith Observatory in Los Angeles, accompanied by a planetary light show. No band on stage, no performance, just pure, immersive audio. The album featured one of the earliest uses of a vocoder on the Raven, a haunting robotic voice that sounded like it came from another dimension. Tales of Mystery and Imagination reached number 38 on the Billboard charts. Respectable, but not a phenomenon. Then came 1977, and everything changed. I, Robot, the second album, inspired by Isaac Asimov's classic science fiction. The album was a philosophical exploration of man versus machine, of technology's promise and peril. For a generation watching computers enter their workplaces, these themes resonated profoundly. The single, I Wouldn't Want to Be Like You, climbed to number 36, powered by a funky, soulful groove delivered by vocalist Lenny Zakatek. But the real revelation was that you didn't need to know who Zakatek was. The song existed on its own terms, perfect and complete. The iconic album cover photographed by the legendary Hypnosis design firm at Charles de Gaulle Airport, became instantly recognizable. I, Robot reached number 9 on the Billboard 200 and went platinum. The Alan Parsons Project had proven their concept worked. You could command the charts without ever playing a live note. Parsons himself later observed, "Audiophiles don't use their equipment to listen to your music. Audiophiles use your music to listen to their equipment." He understood his audience perfectly. By the early 1980s, the Alan Parsons Project had entered their golden era. The Turn of a Friendly Card in 1980 brought Games People Play reaching number 16. Then came Time, a gorgeous ballad featuring Eric Woolfson's soothing vocals, climbing to number 15. But these were just the opening act for what came next. Eye in the Sky. Released in 1982, it would become their defining statement. The album peaked at number 7. The title track, inspired by Woolfson's visit to a Las Vegas casino where he heard the phrase, "Eye in the Sky," 3 times in one day, referring to surveillance cameras, climbed to number 3 on the Hot 100. The song's message about privacy and surveillance struck a nerve. This was years before the internet, before smartphones. But Woolfson and Parsons saw it coming. Eric Woolfson sang with unsettling calm, "I am the eye in the sky. Looking at you, I can read your mind." It was beautiful and chilling in equal measure. By this point, the Alan Parsons Project had sold millions of albums worldwide. They were one of the biggest acts on the planet. But here's the irony. Despite the massive sales, the creators remained largely unrecognized in public. Alan Parsons could walk through an airport without being stopped. They had achieved the impossible. Massive success without the burden of fame. Parsons later reflected, "I was pretty happy not being recognized. I saw what other artists had to deal with, and it was madness." Yet beneath this triumph was a truth that would eventually tear them apart. The musicians who created the project sound were starting to feel like hired hands. Guitarist Ian Bairnson, bassist David Payton, drummer Stuart Elliott. These men played on every album and created the sonic signature. But their names weren't on the album covers. Payton would later express his frustration. "We created that sound and it can't be recreated without us." And then there was Sirius. The instrumental opening to Eye in the Sky, Sirius was a soaring, triumphant piece of progressive rock. It was less than 2 minutes long, never released as a single. But in the late 1980s, the Chicago Bulls adopted it as their introduction music. Suddenly, Sirius became one of the most recognizable pieces of music in the world. Years later, Alan Parsons met Michael Jordan. "Michael, you probably don't know who I am, but I wrote your walk-on music." Jordan shook his hand and said, "Oh, nice to meet you, man," almost like it hadn't sunk in. The irony was perfect. The most famous song of his career was an instrumental intro that most people couldn't name, used to introduce an athlete who would become more famous than any rock star. MTV launched in 1981, and within a few years, it had fundamentally transformed the music business. Suddenly, sound wasn't enough. You needed a face, a personality, a visual identity. For a group that explicitly avoided the limelight and lacked a consistent frontman, this new era posed an existential threat. The Alan Parsons Project tried to adapt. Their 1984 album Ammonia Avenue produced one final US top 20 single. Don't Answer Me reached number 15, aided by an innovative animated music video, but the chart impact was declining. After Eye in the Sky, the project never achieved another platinum record in the United States. While they remained massively popular in Germany, Italy, and Spain, the American audience was moving on. They wanted Madonna. They wanted Prince. They wanted stars who would perform on stage. Vulture culture explored the ruthlessness of modern society, the corporate machinery devouring artistic integrity. The title itself felt like commentary on what was happening to them. Days Are Numbers barely scraped the charts at number 71. Then came Stereotomy in 1985, one of the first rock albums recorded entirely on digital tape. The shift from the warmth of analog to the precision of digital created a different sound, sharper, cleaner, but somehow less organic. Behind the scenes, tensions were mounting. Payton was increasingly frustrated with his invisible role. "Alan's not an accomplished singer," he observed with barely concealed resentment. But the real fracture was forming between Parsons and Woolfson themselves. They had always had different visions. Parsons the technical perfectionist, Wolfson the conceptual storyteller. For years, that tension had been creative fuel. Now, it was becoming a wall. The end came quietly. No dramatic on-stage fight. No scandalous breakup. Just two men realizing they were headed in different directions. Gaudi, released in 1987, would be their final official studio album under the Alan Parsons Project name. Themed after the visionary Spanish architect Antoni Gaudi, it was ambitious, intricate, and beautiful. But the sales didn't match the earlier triumphs. Wolfson was becoming increasingly captivated by musical theater. He saw the project's albums as blueprints for stage productions. Parsons remained committed to the rock and roll studio environment, to the purity of recorded sound. In 1990, they began work on what was supposed to be their 11th album. It was called Freudiana, a concept album exploring the theories of Sigmund Freud. But as work progressed, Wolfson's vision transformed. He wanted to turn it into a full-stage musical. Parsons resisted. This wasn't what the project was about. The disagreement became irreconcilable. Then came the lawsuit. Producer Brian Brawley sued Wolfson for control of the theatrical production. The litigation dragged on for more than 3 years. Parsons later reflected with obvious pain. A sad time for all of us because we were in and out of court for more than 3 years. The show really had the potential of Cats or Les Miserables, and then went down in completely nonsensical litigation. The Alan Parsons Project simply ceased to exist. No farewell concert, no final statement, no group gathering to acknowledge what they had built together. Wolfson later described his decision to keep Alan's name on the project as both the best and the worst decision of my career. It had allowed success without fame, but it had also left his own contributions forever in the shadows. The quiet ending resonated in a way explosions never could. Sometimes partnerships dissolve in courtrooms rather than concert halls. Sometimes there's no one left to say goodbye. For the first time in decades, Alan Parsons faced a choice he had successfully avoided: stepping into the spotlight. In 1993, he released Try Anything Once, his first solo album after dropping the project name. Parsons later admitted, "I felt that the band wouldn't be the same without Wolfson's compositions or vocals." Then came the moment that would have been unthinkable during the project's heyday. In 1994, Alan Parsons took his music on the road. The Alan Parsons Live Project World Tour began, playing smaller theaters and festivals. For fans who had spent decades listening to these songs through headphones, experiencing them live was a revelation. But the absence of Eric Wolfson at the piano was impossible to ignore. Meanwhile, Eric Wolfson fully embraced the theatrical world that had destroyed their partnership. He staged musical versions of Gaudi, The Gambler, and Poe in Germany and Korea. In Europe and Asia, he found the success he'd always imagined, but the magic of the partnership was gone. Parsons continued to explore conceptual themes with solo albums about flight, time travel, and H.G. Wells. The technical mastery remained, but something intangible had been lost. There's a profound loneliness to success when the journey is no longer shared. In 2009, Eric Wolfson released his final album, poignantly titled The Alan Parsons Project That Never Was. It was his attempt to reclaim the creative partnership, to acknowledge his contributions that had lived in Alan's shadow. Months later, Eric Wolfson died of cancer at age 64, the man whose voice had defined the project's biggest hits, whose conceptual visions had shaped their entire catalog, passed away quietly, still largely unknown to the millions who had listened to his music. There was no reunion tour, no final collaboration, no chance to heal whatever wounds remained. Just silence. Decades later, something unexpected happened. The music industry finally recognized what audiophiles had known all along. In 2019, Alan Parsons won a Grammy for Best Immersive Audio Album for the 35th anniversary edition of Eye in the Sky. Standing on that stage, accepting an award for an album recorded in 1982, Parsons reflected on the irony. It had taken nearly 40 years for the industry to validate what he and Wolfson had created. The Alan Parsons Project had sold over 55 million albums worldwide, secured a permanent place in rock history, and influenced generations of producers who saw the studio as an instrument. They proved you could rewrite the rules entirely, selling millions without a stage, without a permanent lineup, without a single charismatic frontman. and Sirius continued its strange afterlife. When ESPN's The Last Dance documentary about Michael Jordan aired in 2020, a new generation heard the triumphant instrumental and wondered about its origins. The Chicago Bulls still play it for every home game introduction. Abbey Road Studios continues to produce remasters of the project's catalog, ensuring their albums remain the benchmark for vinyl collectors and audiophiles. The technical excellence that drove Parsons' entire career has been validated by every generation of listeners who discover that these recordings still sound better than almost anything produced today. But the final question lingers. Was the Alan Parsons Project ahead of its time, or doomed by its own perfection? They succeeded because they never had to be together. They were a duo of architects who built a sonic cathedral, invited 1,000 guests to sing in its choir, and then walked away when the blueprint was finished. No messy personal dynamics destroying the music. No egos tearing apart the dream. Just clean clinical precision maintained until it was time to stop. But that precision came with a price. There was no brotherhood to fracture, but there was also no brotherhood to sustain them. There were no explosive fights, but there was also no shared triumph. They created perfection, but perfection is cold comfort when there's no one left to celebrate with. Eric Wolfson's final reflection captures the bittersweet truth. I have enjoyed the benefits of the Alan Parsons Project's success without having to deal with public recognition. A price I have always felt was worth paying. Was it? The music suggests yes. The silence at the end suggests otherwise. The Alan Parsons Project rewrote every rule of rock success, proving that perfection could sell 50 million records without faces, without touring, without the chaos that usually defines greatness. But in the end, their story asks the question that haunts every creator. Is connection more important than perfection? The music endures. The technical mastery remains unmatched, but the partnership ended in silence. What's your memory of the project? Drop it in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more untold stories.